Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We have folks here from Western Canada, from Ireland, and I'm not sure where else as I look around the group, but a number of places around the U.S. Certainly, one driving a car, and somebody else with a cat in the Nancy Richardson's cat has joined us. So I'm Mary Hunt here at Water with Diane New, and I want to introduce JT Rustad. They are our new person here in the office working as staff to Water and giving us a hand, and we welcome them with warmth and in Water's usual way of delighting in those who join us. So welcome to our second WATERtea of 2022, a chance to discuss this marvelous documentary film, My Name is Pauli Murray. I make no apologies for my enthusiasm about this project. I think this is something that takes us new places. We do this on an auspicious day when Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination for a post in the Supreme Court looks almost real. And if the Senate approves her nomination, which is expected later this week, I think Pauli Murray deserves some credit. We'll talk more about this later. Pauli Murray would have been a great judge on the Supreme Court. But today we begin by acknowledging that we are on indigenous land. In Water's case, in Silver Spring, Maryland, you might think of the indigenous land that you are on. This is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. They were the original stewards of this territory. We acknowledge the trauma that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country and recognize the deep historical, spiritual, and personal trauma that has harmed indigenous communities of color, as well as immigrants and other persons. I want to give a special welcome to those who are new to Water. The tea format is one of really among four formats we use. We have a meditation, we have a liturgy, we have a water talk, which looks at a book usually, and then we have the tea format, which emerged during COVID when people felt that they wanted a little bit more community and not simply the fully liturgical or meditative or fully academic or intellectual, but something hybrid in between. And so these teas have emerged and we love them. They're really a wonderful opportunity to come together and have a chance to talk with each other. Water's programs are aimed at supporting and igniting social change by socializing resources for justice making. Whether in theology, ethics, or ritual, Water's efforts are geared to bring together solid intellectual data with the feminist, womanist, activist, and spiritual commitments of those in the Alliance. This program epitomizes that focus. We're delighted to have back with us today the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, a longtime Water friend and colleague. And I ran into her at the American Film Institute's showing of the movie we're going to discuss, so I know she's seen it at least once, and my guess would be probably more times than that. Let me, as I open our session today, review our format. I will introduce Kelly Brown Douglas. She will make some introductory remarks, and then we'll have a chance to chat in small groups, ever so briefly, just so that we can meet other people and have a sense of what people are thinking. And then we'll have an open conversation with Kelly, and we'll close at the top of the hour, and the Zoom will remain open after that for those who would like to continue conversation. But it makes a kind of graceful exit for those who need to leave for their next appointment if we close officially at 3 or 1 or 2 minutes after that, and others can continue chatting. No obligation to stay, but you're more than welcome. The video of this session will be on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org, along with notes. So don't worry if you miss terms or spellings or titles. We'll take care of all that. And you enjoy your lunch or your cup of tea or whatever it may be, the company of someone else, and we will make sure that you get all the materials that you need after this to continue your own study of this very remarkable person, Pauli Murray. Let me begin with my introduction of Kelly Brown Douglas. I'm going to begin by understating the case. Kelly Brown Douglas is a womanist rock star. She's a gifted scholar, an experienced administrator, and a valued pastor. And those three things don't normally reside in one life. Let me say it again, a gifted scholar. In fact, I will be shamelessly touting her new book, Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter, because I have um, been not so subtle about the fact that we will have a book session on that soon. She's also an experienced administrator, and she is currently the dean of Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and she's a valued pastor, and that I know from people who have been under her care. Kelly taught at Howard University Divinity School long ago, and then took on a position at Goucher College, where she was the Susan D. Morgan Professor of Religion. She's been the canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral, as well as theologian in residence at Trinity Church, Wall Street. She is the first, as I mentioned earlier, but the first dean of Episcopal Divinity School in its new collaboration with progressive religious leaders at Union Theological Seminary, where she did her Master's of Divinity and her doctorate in systematic theology. So she's back home. Kelly's writings are powerful. Her book, Sexuality and the Black Church, A Womanist Perspective in 1999, really led the conversation about homophobia within the Black church community. She joined us here at Water in 2015 for a memorable talk on another one of her books, which I highly recommend. We do have the video of it, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. That came out in 2015, where she examines the deep roots of Stand Your Ground culture in America and the challenges it brings to Black church communities. I will, as I said earlier, be inviting her back to talk about Resurrection Hope, which for me at least has been a must-read during this Lenten season. It is a clear-eyed vision of what hope can look like in hard times. The Reverend Douglas was ordained at St. Margaret's Episcopal Church in 1985, the first Black woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest in the Southern Ohio Diocese, and among the first Black women to be ordained nationwide in the Episcopal Church. She was the first to receive the Anna Julia Cooper Award by the Union of Black Episcopalians in July 2012, and that was both for her literary boldness and leadership in the development of womanist theology and discussing the complexities of Christian faith in African American context. So Kelly Brown Douglas brings to us a wealth of experience and commitments to her reflections that I think today will be very valuable as we seek to understand another Black Episcopal priest, Pauli Murray. If you've seen the movie or read some of the books about Murray, and again, I'll put them in the chat, but the most important two, I think, are Song in a Weary Throat, which is the autobiography of Pauli Murray, and it is a marvelous read. I mean, in addition to everything else, it is a marvelous read. She writes brilliantly. And then I think a very important book, this is the book Jane Crow, which is The Life of Pauli Murray, A Life of Pauli Murray by Rosalind Rosenberg. And this too is essential reading for understanding this remarkable person. If you've seen the movie or read some of these books, you know that Pauli Murray came from North Carolina, graduated from Howard University Law School, later did advanced degrees at Cal Berkeley and Yale, practiced law, taught law, shaped law. Let me say it again, practiced law, taught law, shaped law. Eventually, Pauli Murray decided that the issues they cared most about were also matters of heart and spirit, for which theological studies and eventual ordination as the first Black woman Episcopal priest were a fitting way to deepen her already stunning contribution to this world. There are lots of ways to talk about Pauli Murray. I'm going to say today for our conversation that all ways of gendering Pauli Murray are okay for this conversation. We may decide they aren't later, but some people use she, her pronouns for Pauli Murray. Some use they, their pronouns. Others use Pauli Murray for Pauli Murray. And I'm going to invite you to be comfortable doing whatever you want as we deepen in our understanding of their way of being in the world. But Kelly Brown Douglas, I can think of no one better to offer insights and challenges in the spirit of Pauli Murray, in the octave of when we hope and pray we will see the first Black woman justice named to the Supreme Court. And so, if I may, I dedicate our gathering today to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, sending her strength to complete a confirmation process that proves that the work of justice remains largely unfinished. We are in your hands, my friend.
Well, one, I feel like I am back home here with Water and
Good.
with my sister friends, Mary and Diane Newell, and each of you. And so not only thank you for that gracious, more than gracious, and certainly humbling introduction, and one that I will only try to continue to live into to honor such an introduction. And thank you for always inviting me to be amongst you. I am always fed, and so thank you. And I know I will be this afternoon. And what a true privilege and a humbling experience to talk about Pauli Murray, who has been in my soul for a long time as an Episcopal priest. Uh, I will be 39 years in the Episcopal priesthood in September. And I currently work, as uh, Mary said, at the Washington National Cathedral as a canon theologian. And every time that I enter that building and stand at the west end, which are the entrance into the building, as we get ready to process in for the service, uh, there are many occasions in which I think of Pauli Murray and how indeed I am, to borrow from the words of Zora Neale Hurston, walking down the highway that she threw up in the middle of the wilderness. And so it is a privilege to offer some reflections on Pauli Murray. I'll offer some reflections, 10 minutes or less, and then we will follow the order of the day as Mary suggested. So let me begin with a few of my thoughts and reflections. Pauli Murray was ordained to the Episcopal priesthood on January 8th, 1977. Thus, as Mary said, the first Black woman to become an Episcopal priest. As historically significant as Pauli's ordination was for the Episcopal Church, as well as for the global Anglican communion of which the Episcopal Church is a part, it does not capture the profound historical significance of Pauli's priesthood. For inasmuch as Pauli Murray recognized a call that was more than about a career path, but rather a moral commitment to create a more just world that related to Pauli's deep spirituality as a connection to God. Inasmuch as this was the case, Pauli Murray was a priest long before Pauli was ordained on that January 1977 day, long before the Episcopal Church recognized that fact. And it is who Pauli was as one called by God that propelled Pauli's civil rights, social justice activism, fueled Pauli's refusal to submit to society's binary constructions of human identity, be it racial, ethnic, or gendered sexual binaries, as well as prompted Pauli to enter seminary well before the church consented to the ordination of women. In many respects, therefore, Pauli Murray's call to the priesthood serves as an illuminating frame through which to understand Pauli's remarkable journey, allowing us to appreciate not simply Pauli's historical importance, but also Pauli's spiritual significance for us today. To appreciate the Pauli Murray that was the priest allows us to further appreciate why it is important for documentaries like My Name is Pauli Murray to be made, as well as future films such as the scripted film of Pauli's life being made by Filmco and any other projects that will surely come. For to be sure, the fullness of who Pauli Murray was and Pauli's meaning for us cannot be captured in a singular film, a book, a project, or conversation. But with that said, let me try to at least point to Pauli's significance as a priest, so to understand Pauli's historical and spiritual meaning for us even today. As I was wrestling with my own call to the Episcopal priesthood in light of protest and opposition that I received from Episcopal clergymen, my mentor and spiritual father in the priesthood said this. He said, KD, as he often called me, if you are a priest, that is between you and God. For it is God, he said, who calls you, not the church. And so, whether or not the church recognizes that call, he told me, it is left to you to live into it. And so it was for Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray lived into her their priesthood way before that January 8th, 1977 day in Washington National Cathedral, when Pauli was ordained to the priesthood by Bishop Creighton. Indeed, Pauli, perhaps long before, recognized the call to the priesthood, even if Pauli did not name it as such. For Pauli poignantly recognized that their November 20th, 1910 birth was in the year of Halley's Comet, and that it was on the same day that Leo Tolstoy died. Both events marking for Pauli more than simply a coincidence, but perhaps a sign regarding what was to come in Pauli's life. And to be sure, Pauli never forgot the words that Bishop Henry Delaney, one of the first Black Episcopal bishops, spoke to her on his deathbed as he pronounced Pauli a child of destiny, perhaps a moment in which an official from the church in fact recognized Pauli to be a priest. To say the least, the fact that Pauli Murray notes these events as momentous moments in Pauli's life, in the very least suggests that fueling Pauli's historical trajectory was some sense of a spiritual trajectory. That is, a recognition of a power beyond themselves to which they were connected, if not accountable. Whatever the case may be, Pauli would come to recognize, in fact, reflecting back at their activism, that inasmuch as they were fighting the legal and political battles for workers' rights, civil rights, women's rights, and more, that even in those battles, Pauli said that they were, and I quote, always more concerned with moral and ethical issues as opposed to political and legal issues. Thus, Pauli came to realize that, again in Pauli's words, they were, quote unquote, doing ministry all along as they were trying to make the world and I quote Pauli again, a true community based, as Pauli said, upon equality, mutuality, and reciprocity. One that affirms the richness of individual diversity as well as the common human ties that bind us all together. This transcendent vision of a future that affirms the richness of individual diversity was indeed what compelled Pauli to doggedly claim their non-binary being in terms of gender and race. In doing so, Pauli utterly refused to accept a segregated world, let alone a segregated society. For not only did such a society betray, as Pauli would say, common human ties, but it actually created internal segregated realities and thus struggles for Pauli and others like Pauli. It said, in other words, the various identities that were Pauli in opposition to one another, not allowing Pauli to flourish into the fullness of who they were. As Pauli said, and I quote again, I do not regard myself as a representative of blended humanity, carrying in I do regard myself as a representative of blended humanity, carrying in my bloodstream, Pauli said, the three great races of man, Caucasian, Negroid, and Mongolian. I never can pronounce that word, end quote. Bottom line is this. Pauli's fight against segregation was political, it was personal, and it was spiritual. It was spiritual in that the very person of Pauli as a child of God suggested that God's human creation was not a bifurcated binary creation. It was personal in that Pauli's very personhood was more complicated than the binary social markers of race, gendered identity, and sexual expression would hold. And thus it was political, as Pauli fought against those social, political, and even ecclesiastical structures, systems, policies, and ideologies that negated the sacred value of Pauli's full personhood. And so, that Pauli identified the intersectionality of oppression as Jane Crow was born not from abstract analysis of the inequities and inequalities of laws that privileged white cisgendered hetero males, but born from their own lived experiences as someone who queered the boundaries of the laws and the way in which justice could be enacted so that all could be treated equally. And Pauli's sense of justice was about nothing less than catching up to what God truly created the world to be. The point of the matter is that even as we rightfully reflect upon the ways in which Pauli Murray's courageous activism and tremendous contributions from Brown versus the Board of Education to the founding of NOW to the fight for the ERA, even as those things laid the foundation and for a more just and equitable nation, it was Pauli's lived priesthood, that is, being called from the womb, that propelled Pauli, if not sustained Pauli, on this justice-seeking journey. And as much as Pauli's significance, and as much as it was about changing policies and laws, this journey was more and most significantly, I believe, about opening up our moral imagination for what was and is possible. What was possible from Pauli's vantage point as a priest transcended societal, politics, and legislative agendas. What was possible was a world where a Pauli Murray would be able to walk in freedom, and I quote Pauli again, proudly before God and man, and to glorify creation through the genius of their unique self-expression, end quote. This was a world that reflected the very God that called Pauli into life on November 20th, 1910, and thus eventually into the ordained ministry. It is no wonder, therefore, that Pauli's journey would culminate, in fact, into ordination. For as Pauli explained, it was in ordination that, and I quote Pauli again, all of the strands of my life came together. Descendant of slaver and of slave owner, I had already been called poet, lawyer, teacher, and friend. Now I was empowered to minister the sacrament of one in whom there is no north or south, no black or white, no male or female, only the spirit of love and reconciliation, drawing us all toward the goal of human wholeness, end quote. And so, what is the significance of Pauli Murray for us as we think about Pauli today? It is, I believe, that as a priest, even long before being ordained, Pauli expanded our moral imagination to envision a society where, in fact, there are no binaries of first and last, because all are treated equally and respected in their varied, complex richness as the sacred creations that they are. And so I say today, let's not simply talk about Pauli Murray. Let's not simply remember Pauli Murray. Let our moral imaginations be expanded by the priest that was Pauli Murray, so that we can go about creating a world that could hold and allow for a Pauli Murray to flourish into the fullness of whomever God has created them to be. And so it is, I believe, left for us to carry forth the spiritual legacy, if you will, that was Pauli Murray, by resolving to partner with the one we may call God, if you will, in moving toward a more just future. This, I believe, is our call. It is one which Pauli captures most poignantly in words from their poem, Song in a Weary Throat. And so I will end with these words, where Pauli says this: give me a song of hope and a world where I can sing it. Give me a song of faith and a people to believe in it. Give me a song of kindliness and a country where I can live it. Give me a song of hope and love and a brown girl's heart to hear it. I'll end there.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, for expanding our moral imaginations after the fashion of Pauli Murray. You have done her proud, and I think some of her legacy is so evident as you have your own shining priesthood before us. Thank you. I want to open the floor now for a plenary conversation with Kelly Brown Douglas on not only her presentation, but also the movie that we have seen and other topics related. I would also, before we go any further, like to say, again, on this auspicious day, that one of the things I've come upon recently is in a publication of the American Civil Liberties Union is an article about a letter that Pauli Murray wrote to President Richard Nixon, no less, in September of 1971. And she wrote, "I applied to you as my potential employer to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm a constitutional lawyer whose specialty is human rights." And she goes on in both humorous and serious vein to make the case for themselves in this fabulous letter, both serious and whimsical, certainly an antecedent to today's selection of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. So I only ask, how long, oh God, how long? And where do you think she got the patience and the fortitude to live in such advance of the culture in which she was set? But I love that letter that they wrote this letter saying, "I'm applying. This is not done, but I'm applying." And even wrote about they were possessed of a good heart, and they had the assurance of their cardiologist, which I thought was a brilliant way of putting it. So there's so much here. It's just such a picnic. Let me open the floor. Please use the reaction button at the bottom right to raise your hand, as I'm doing right now with my own front paw. And I'm going to put it down now. Lower your hand, and then we'll know who wants to speak. And please give your name, maybe the place where you're located, and make your comment brief so we can hear from as many people as possible. The floor is wide open, and you're next. So go ahead.
This is Sherry White. Just responding to what Mary just said about Pauli forwarding herself for the Supreme Court, I'm delighted to see that Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's daughter did the same thing for her, writing the president to recommend her mother. So we're getting things started at a younger stage of awareness and everything right now, which is wonderful.
Great. Thank you. Who's next? Go ahead, Rita Mary. Unmute, please. Go ahead, Rita Mary. Rita Mary, you're still muted. Would you unmute your sound, please?
Is that it now?
Yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So sorry. I thought, okay. I was touched by your comment just now, Mary, about the culture that Pauli Murray was in, and how she was able not just to survive, but to grow and thrive and speak. And it really, and she said about the fact that the one who was guiding her said, "You are a priest, whether you're ordained or not." And we were talking in our small group about there is the women's ordination movement, women church, but a couple of us were saying that in our own lives, without ordination, we've had this experience of being priest, of ministering, of caring for people, of educating people, and have been told that I've been told that on occasion. So to hear that sense that Pauli had before ordination, I think speaks for many Catholic women who are in a culture that is not encouraging it. That's it.
Kelly, thank you, Rita Mary. Absolutely, you speak for many Kelly, any reflection on that?
No, I think that's right. And your question, what sustained Pauli was indeed, it seems, Pauli's own sense of spirituality and Pauli's own sense of that the world was created to be different. And so Pauli's sense of justice transcended, as Pauli said, any political, social kind of sense of justice. Pauli's sense of justice was governed by Pauli's understanding of Pauli's own faith, Pauli's understanding of God. And that was, and what you hear in a lot of Pauli's sermons, certainly love was at the center of that. And so, as we often say that love is a synonym for God, for Pauli, that was so. And so that held center. And so, it's one thing to be engaged in the struggles for social justice. Anyone can do that if they're so moved, so committed. But what difference does it make when we're engaged in that from the vantage point of religious or faith institutions? And, I think the difference that makes is that it is grounded, that struggle, that commitment, if you will, is grounded in one's own spirituality, one's connection to something greater than oneself. And when it is grounded in that, we never ask the question, and I'm going to date myself, the commercial that used to come on for when we first went to instant soup, which now wouldn't be instant soup, but the little child would say, "Is it soup yet?" Lipton instant soup. I see some people who are nodding their heads, willing to admit that they remember that. And so, but when we are grounded in this deeper sense of spirituality, when our commitment rather to social justice is grounded in our spirituality, then we never ask that question, really, is it soup yet? We continue to move toward this promise of this more, as I like to put it, this more just future, and partnering with God in that work. And I think that's what sustained Pauli. Now, even as I say that, we have to recognize the toll that also takes, right? And the struggle to be in a world that negates every aspect of your humanity, and even to be in a ecclesiastical institution, in a church, I'd like to say, that which claims and aspires to be church, every aspect of your humanity. And so we have to always be careful, I think, when we're talking about people like Pauli Murray, especially Black women like Pauli Murray, that we don't create the Black superwoman, right? And recognize the humanity and the fragility of one's humanity. And so, as much as Pauli remained forever committed and dedicated to changing the world, to transformation, Pauli, also, as we know, struggled with their own health, etc., physical, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual health, right? And it would be Pauli's even partnership with Rini Barlow that would bring Pauli, always a part of the church, but would sort of help Pauli to renew sort of that experience and those commitments as they both went to, I'm pointing to St. Bart's like you all are in New York, but ended up going to St. Bart's. But anyway, so I just want to say I affirm what was said in the sense of Pauli's spirituality was that sustaining thing for Pauli, and at the same time caution us not to create, as so often happens to Black women, this sort of super Black woman, and the strength of the Black woman, for which all burdens can be placed on Black women's shoulders, to carve pathways for all other women to cross, because Pauli was, you know, and we know that there were struggles with Nile and white women, etc. So we don't want to forget that.
And they paid an enormous price. They paid an enormous price. Thank you. Moving on to Clara Francie, Commerce Hours, next speaker.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so grateful and thankful for being introduced to Pauli Murray. As a ordained clergy in the Baptist Church, I can recall being afraid even to announce my call. It took an extra 20 years just because where I grew up, we weren't allowed. Our pastor's wife got called, and they threw us out of our convention. And some of my own colleagues right now, most of us are bivocational. We have this, sometimes it seems like we have to have more education, and Mary and Diane can understand a recent struggle that I had, even in the PhD process as a counselor educator, of trying to justify why religion and spirituality is a foundation of our moral compass, and why there is a need to advocate for that, even in my own community, the African American community, so we can dispel some of the mental health issues that I see. So I had more of a comment. I'm just thankful for just being introduced to Pauli, and has given me more of a zeal to know that I am on the right track.
Indeed, Clara Francie. Indeed. Thank you. Other comments? I'd like to throw in a little piece in terms of how women and non-binary persons like ourselves can in fact be useful. Joyce Hill, who's a United Methodist, she was a church bureaucrat for generations, really, and she drew my attention recently to the fact that the United Methodist women were the funders and supporters for some of Pauli Murray's most important work. In 1948, now think about it, now where were you in 1948? They asked Pauli to write up a short explanation of segregation laws during Jim Crow, so the church, the Methodist Church, could oppose segregation and help parishes at local levels to figure out how they could bypass local laws. Jeanette Stokes, who's one of our regulars from the Research Center for Women in Ministry in the South, put it this way. She said the pamphlet that they wanted turned out to be the size of a phone book. In fact, it was the 746-page States Laws on Race and Color, in which she exposed the extent of absurdity of segregation. And that was the book that Thurgood Marshall called the Bible of Brown versus Board of Education. We were talking about it at lunch today. That book, 746 pages, and those United Methodist women kept shelling out the money to keep that little pamphlet growing and growing and growing until finally it turned out into this volume, which so quickly went out of print. Why? Because the laws changed because of Brown. And I found that really exciting for those of us who have any relationship to religions, that our women's groups, it wasn't the United Methodist Church, it was the women's division, which always kept their money separate, that made that happen in the early 50s with Pauli Murray as their colleague and writer. So that was a magnificent, imagine doing that research in the 50s, no cell phone, couldn't really Google it. 746 pages later, States Laws on Race and Color changed the world. And the United Methodist Women's Division had a role in that. And so I kind of glom onto things like that because I think it helps us to see, especially I know some of you who are great supporters of women's work, both financially through your communities. It can make a whole big difference. That's a wow case to me. I mean, wow. Who's next? Yes, Janice.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for being here. It's so amazing to hear you speak. I just wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about Pauli's relationship to the idea of reciprocity, because I find that really fascinating and we don't talk about it enough. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of when you ask that, what do you, I can talk about that in many ways. So when you ask that, what are you referring
Well,
to?
I'm thinking of it in the exchange of, the give and take of receiving and giving, whether it's spiritual or not, when you're with the other, so to speak, as well, because there is that give back no matter what. And we don't really look at it. We're always looking at the giving part and not the giving back a part of it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're speaking to, but Pauli Murray, for Pauli Murray, it seems to me from my read of Pauli Murray and Pauli Murray's what Pauli Murray did, Pauli Murray was always concerned, it seemed to me, to ask the question of what am I supposed to do to make a situation better, right? And so not so much concerned as except Pauli Murray had to survive, and one of the reasons, by the way, that Pauli Murray was in the position to do what a book that is still referred to in law schools today, because Pauli Murray traced all of the state laws on race. But Pauli Murray had to do that because Pauli Murray needed money and needed employ. And because as qualified as Pauli Murray was, and we know this story hasn't changed, even with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, that don't matter how qualified you are, you're Black and you're female, and there you go. And so Pauli Murray couldn't get a job. And so, why they ended up doing this. But so Pauli Murray was worried about trying to earn to live and people support Pauli to live and to exist. Pauli Murray never lived the kind of life, if one wants to think of it in materiality, that Pauli Murray contributions and education and Pauli Murray's professional status should have allowed. So the get, I'm not quite sure. Pauli Murray was about to give. And also Pauli Murray believed wholeheartedly, was driven by the notion of reconciliation and redemption. And you hear that in Pauli Murray's sermons.
Great. Thank you.
It's also interesting how they changed in a way after the ordination. Becoming a priest changed them in some ways, according to their friends and according to their own commentary, as I read it. That people said, "Oh well, they were a difficult person, strident, any number of things that we've all been called." They interrupted people in seminary. I mean, what a rough ride at General Seminary they had.
Well, yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, and then talking to, in fact, 2 days ago or so, not even two, I'm speaking to Pauli Murray's niece, Catherine Ross, and Pauli Murray was always, according to Catherine, this sort of pastoral person, but that came more live when Pauli was ordained. In terms of General Theological Seminary, as I like to say, let's be clear, that Pauli Murray was just Pauli Murray's presence challenged that seminary, full of white males and sort of Anglo-Catholic in its orientation, liturgically. That Pauli Murray, I mean, strident.
Really.
That Pauli Murray interrupted and didn't let these white guys talk. They probably didn't let each other talk, but it was Pauli Murray. And of course, what Pauli Murray did discover was that they had a hearing problem.
Hearing loss.
And so that it was hearing loss. And so it wasn't simply just interrupting, but they were also mad because Pauli would take advantage of the sort of bulletin board that they had and express their opinions. Pauli Murray said protests by typewriter, but would put things sort of like Luther nailing Luther's thesis to the doors of Wittgenstein, would nail stuff on that bulletin board, and they didn't like what she would put there. And so, I think that we take these criticisms that came out of General at that time with a grain of salt. And, it was rough there. And so Pauli went to, imagine leaving General
To go to Virginia.
to go to VTS. Things got to be bad. Right. You leave New York to go to the South and to go to the institution. Virginia's a different place now. I'm friends with Ian Markham, the dean. So don't anyone say that Kelly's talking about VTS. But this is a place that, the Episcopal Church isn't colonizing adjacent or slavery adjacent. It is the wealthy tribe. If it's bad, I can talk about it. I know it is. It is a well-earned reputation for being the church of slaveholders and the colonizing church. And VTS, oh my goodness, there you go. It's a similar. So to imagine that things are so rough that Pauli Murray goes to VTS. Also, while these people were complaining about Pauli Murray's stridency, by the time Pauli Murray goes to seminary, do you realize what Pauli Murray had already done in the world of civil rights? It's amazing. This was a lawyer that, these are, to Pauli, these are kids. And not only was Pauli a lawyer, be no Brown versus Board of Education without Pauli Murray. And so, Pauli Murray, Reed versus Reed, a case in terms of sort of, what do you call it? Divorce and alimony and all of that. So support that Justice Ginsburg would eventually be a part of that case. It would be that without Pauli Murray. So Pauli Murray goes to General, and these young white boys are going to school Pauli Murray. There was just like no appreciation with who they had in their midst.
And they thought of her as an overachiever, that she was kind of showing off.
Showing
Hello,
off.
Good morning.
Right.
Good morning, America. She's showing off.
Right. So this is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in front of that daggone judicial committee. Like, who are you? It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so, but that's the plight of being a Black woman, right? And then if you speak back, then you're strident or you're angry. And so I think we always have to put that in context in terms of who Pauli Murray was when Pauli Murray went down there. And it seemed to me that Pauli Murray was humbling Pauli Murray's self to be down there with those folk. The other thing to note, and then I'll show by CS3, is that Pauli Murray went to General way before women were allowed to be ordained in the Episcopal Church. Pauli Murray also participated in trying to in that struggle for women's ordination. And Pauli Murray joined with a professor whose name escapes me from Virginia Theological Seminary, and almost what they did with the race laws, what Pauli did with race laws in the state, then mined if you will, the Episcopal canons to see if there was anything in our canons and canon law that suggested that women couldn't be ordained. And Pauli Murray said, there's not to anything in canon law that prohibits that. This is all while being a student, right, at General Theological Seminary.
Yeah, it's a great story, and it is a very familiar tale and a very familiar dynamic to many women who have studied theology, some here present. It's a very familiar story when you end up being better than your classmates, more knowledgeable than some of your professors, and still you're treated like a third, fourth class citizen. I want to thank you, Kelly Brown Douglas, for being with us. And I'm gonna now this is gonna be really, this is not just an ask, this is a tell.
No,
This book,
thank you.
Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter, is really a must read, especially this Lenten season with everything that's going on, and particularly the last 2 chapters on resurrection testimony and resurrection reparations. I think this is just a stellar book, and we will
Thank
be
you.
wrangling you for another one of these talks on your own book very soon. It'll probably be either July or the fall. So I wish you would take my best wishes also to your colleague Douglas Berger, who helped make
I
the
will.
arrangements. Please tell him we appreciate very much his work. We will look forward to you being back with us whenever your schedule allows, and we'll work it out for this book. Meanwhile, folks, if you want a good read, that's the one, and I'll put it in the notes. Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter. This has been a very instructive event, and I thank Kelly for bringing your wisdom and your experience to this.